Please take your seats. There are some really good seats on this side. Good morning. I hope you enjoyed last night. Not too much to be awake, but as yesterday, we will be serving coffee, plenty of coffee during this morning. So you all have an opportunity to wake up. Yesterday was sometimes moving, sometimes touching upon difficult subjects, artistic freedom, freedom in general as a precondition for culture, for creativity. And today will be very much about the preconditions for cultural and creative industries and new ways of thinking about these conditions, new ways of enabling a creative, culturally relevant society. And I think the voices that you will be hearing will be coming from many different entrance points, but they will all talk about this subject. Opening today's conference day is the question, can a game raise awareness? And here to answer this question is the creative director of Secret Hut, Martin Salin. The floor is yours.
All right. Hi. Good morning. Oops. This is my talk. It's called "There's No Time to Waste." My name is Martin Salin. I am a video game developer, and I have been making games for quite some time. I started at a company called Coldwood the same month that my son was born, and I worked at that company until my son was taller than me. So it was a very good measurement for how long I had been doing it. But now I'm at a new company called Secret Hut, where we make games slightly differently than what we did before. And throughout this long career of mine, I made one game or two games that stood out. The two Unravel games, which we'll be talking a little bit about today. Because the thing is, before we made Unravel, we made tons of games that were really about nothing. It was just, a bunch of kind of young dudes who were really into video games and thought that making games for a living was really cool, regardless of what kind of games we actually made. So we did whatever we sort of could get our hands on. We did whatever we could get away with. So we made tons of little different demos that were sort of pointing in different directions, and then we hooked up with a publisher that had us making a skiing game. So we made lots of games about snow and sports and things like that, that were really like bite-sized things that we worked on for really short amounts of time, and that didn't really have that much to say, which was kind of cool to begin with, but it was also all kind of hard. I think the thing that people don't really expect about making games is that it's a lot harder than you think. A lot of work goes into it, and a lot of expertise and knowledge and just time and focus. So like even the tiny little things on your phone is probably, lots of people working for many, many months, even years in some cases, for even the smallest little things. So it was hard work and kind of grueling work sometimes. And eventually you got to the point where it started to feel a little bit like creatively unsatisfying. So we started trying to do bigger things that were a little bit more ambitious, but we were still sort of stuck in that loop of doing whatever we could get away with. It was hard to sell the bigger ideas. And then one of those small games, that game about nothing, a fighting game that we made, got really successful. It was like, from our point of view, from our perspective, a pretty big hit. And that was, you know, it was like being dumped in ice water. It was a shock. It was really, really upsetting. You would think that it's something like that would make you happy, but to me, it felt like such a colossal waste, because the thing is, up until that point, I hadn't really sort of finished all these thoughts about, you know, what goes into time and how much time other people spend on the games that we make. Like, the time and attention are super valuable things, super valuable commodities. Time especially, because time is a finite resource. We have the time that we have, and we should spend it on things that are worthy of our time. And I think it's like, it's okay to waste our own time, but it's not okay for me to waste your time, because that would be cruel. And our game wasn't like a huge success. I think we sold 666,000 copies, something which is perfect numbers. Like, stop, don't sell anymore. We nailed it. And by video game, like by modern video game standards, that's kind of small. But for us, it was huge. It was, you know, like massive. We could live on that for years. But still, I sort of got to this point where I would envision all these 600,000 people, you know, a crowd of 600 people that give you their undivided attention for like 6 to 8 hours, something. That's pretty rare. And like, I don't know exactly what kind of backgrounds that you have, but I would say that most people never get close to anything like a platform like that. Like, it's a super unique opportunity to actually speak to people, to actually give them something meaningful, and no matter how small, to give them something that's important, something that's worth keeping. And that was like the shocking moment for me, when I just felt like, oh my God, all I did was waste these people's time. Like, I had the ear of hundreds of thousands of people, and I didn't tell them anything actually worth listening to. It was just like, I think it was literally called a time waster in the game, when we talked to our producers about it. And I felt really bad about it. I thought it was kind of terrible to have had that chance, but not take it. Because I think that, you know, if you have a chance to do something good, it feels kind of strange to not take that chance. And there. The good thing is that we screwed up the next project and we all got fired. So the company was in ruins. We went down in flames, and it was wonderful, because for me this was a chance to do things differently. I certainly don't recommend it as like a method for inspiration and creativity boosting, but in this case it was very good, because I mean, no one is as, you know, powerful as the person with nothing to lose. And I think I was still stuck in that mindset where it's like, oh, it's so cool to make games, and I really don't want to lose this job, which somehow maybe became limiting for me. So I've used the description before that it felt like being pushed off a cliff, only to realize that, hey, I can fly. This is really cool. Because for me, it was liberating. That one time, it was cool. I think for the most part, it's just like, the whole myth about the suffering artist is a myth, and it's destructive and bad. but sometimes unusual circumstances can actually bring out the best in you. And I felt that since we'd been doing kind of like the wrong things in the wrong ways, we were all overworked and pushing burnout and doing things we didn't really care about, and it just felt like, why? We're making video games. It's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be meaningful, and it's supposed to give people something valuable. So I wanted to make something right. And that's when I designed Unravel, which was a very strange process because so much about it sounds kind of made up because it was just like a little bit too perfect, but it's just sometimes the stars really align. I had this idea, it was inspired by a song lyric actually about unraveling when you're away from the things that you love. And I thought like, I wanted to make a game where empathy was a core feature. Because I feel like it's so cool the way games can make you care about stuff. Games can immerse you in a situation and like really let you experience things from this character's point of view. So I wanted to make a game that was different from everything we'd made before. A game about love and the bonds between people and care. And I'd written a little short like one-pager thing of this, and we sent it to a publisher, and then I went on vacation, and the publisher got back to us and said like, that thing, it's really cool, it's really different, it's so far removed from everything else that you've done before, like this is awesome, can we see more? And I was out here with my family camping when I got the call, and I told them that I can give you one day and see what I can do. So I made a little pitch where I was just I made this little doll from wire that I peeled off an anchor cable that belonged to like a old boat. And then the strangest things of all regarding things that sound slightly made up is that I knew I wanted a yarn character because I'd drawn a little sketch before, but I didn't have yarn, so I figured like, oh, should I try to go into town? But then I ran into this like punk rock kid with like leather jacket who was knitting with red yarn, and I thought this is just thank you. And just asked him if I could borrow some yarn, and he said, like, what do you need it for? And I said, wait 2.5 years and you'll see. And it actually took pretty much spot on 2.5 years from that day, so that was kind of cool. I don't know his name, but he's in the credit as that punk rock kid. So that was kind of weird. I made my little yarn doll, and I was just running around in the woods trying to play out what the game mechanics of this thing would be. Just sort of inventing scenarios and you know, walking tightropes and hoisting things and pulling stuff around. And like, as I was doing that, I very much realized that nature had to play a very big role in this game, because it would just it would have felt like slapping karma in the face to not include nature, because it was the backdrop for everything that I did, and it was just like the inspiration for everything I did, and it was just so important. And it just felt like you have to stick with what feels right, and it just felt right to include nature in the game. So we set the game here in Norrland, our home. And I think the whole point of this game was try to make something that was worth keeping. So we figured that we should start with what we feel is worth keeping, and like what's dear and near to us. So it felt like a chance to sort of invite the world to our home and like give them a slice of the things that we care about and the things that we love. And also it was just like a fantastic way to spend a work day too, where you can just be out there gathering reference photos and chilling out. And I also think there's something like really charming about focusing on the ordinary, because in a video game, because I feel like video games very often aim towards the fantastic. It's, you know, either it's explosions and fire, or it's sugar and candy and colors, and there's not that many games that actually give you a chance to just appreciate just how beautiful the real world is. And that's kind of the perspective that we had with everything in Unravel, because you're very small. You get the chance to sort of just enjoy things and really see them up close and see how cool they actually are. So we tried a lot of different ways, different styles to do this. And this is from a very early draft. It didn't end up looking like this. But what we settled on in the end was that we wanted to try to capture what these environments actually feel like. So it is photographic, it is realistic, but more than anything, it's just about trying to put you there with the music and with the sounds and with the gameplay. So when you're walking across the mire and trying to not get wet and trying to not get stung by the mosquitoes, it's kind of like, it feels like the real thing. And I'm really proud of the way it turned out. So there's a lot of things like that when you're playing in the new snow and knocking snow off branches, not because it actually serves any kind of gameplay purpose most of the time, but because it's fun and it's pleasurable, and it feels like the real thing when you see the snow glittering out in the sunlight, and it's just like makes you feel good. And as I mentioned before, it was a game that was designed to inspire empathy. Like the whole thing was that Yarny, our little, you can barely see him there, is an unusual video game here in the sense that Yarny is quite fragile. It's like a little yarn thing that doesn't have that like any superpowers or things like that. But what we wanted was to make a hero that players would care for. Like instead of like, oh, I'm a superhero, I can take on the world and save everyone. It's more like I want to care for this little thing, and I feel bad when the comically oversized lemming tears it to shreds. But yeah, you want the players to feel protective, and that also obviously applied to nature, because it is kind of like, it's difficult. You don't want to preach. You never want to preach, but you also have to kind of stay true to your ideals, and you have to try to say something meaningful with what you do. You have to use your platforms. And we tried to use our platform for different things, but one of the things was that, like, one of our core principles here is that we have to place people over profit, and we have to place the environment over the economy. Like where we live in the north of Sweden, like sometimes we feel like a colony because there is quite a lot of exploitation going on, and there is quite a lot of, short-sighted profit hunting going on, and stuff like that. It doesn't work. We can't have nice things and ruthless exploitation. Like you have to make that choice. It's one or the other. Exploitation is, by its nature, a subtractive process. It doesn't generate value. It extracts value and moves it somewhere else. And then eventually you run out of valuable things, and you've destroyed the things that were valuable in the first place. And that was one of the sort of core messages of the game. And I thought that was really, really interesting, because we were kind of looking at, like some of the horribly failed mining experiments that have been going on in Norrland this past like 10 years or so, and trying to write something about that. And that super resonated with people from many different countries. Like I had people from China that approached me and talked to me about how like that felt so relatable to them, because they were from some small village in China that had gone through the exact same process, where just like ruthless exploitation led to destroying the culture and the environment and people's lives, more or less. So it's kind of weird. I don't want to. I'm here because of things that took a long time to build, but would take a really short time to ruin. Like if you look at me personally, I think like like there was a government program in the 80s where they made computers cheaper to make them more accessible for people. And I think like the Swedish game industry would probably not even have been remotely the same if we hadn't had that. So for me, that was like, you know, a long-term investment that pays off instead of focusing on, you know, short-term exploitation and profit. And Unravel wouldn't have been the game it is if we didn't still have nice things left, if we still didn't have, you know, an unspoiled environment to be inspired by. And I think we're kind of at the crossroads where things could turn pretty badly for us. And obviously, it's just a video game, and it's not that big of a deal. But the thing is, the same problems that would make this video game not exist is also the same problem that could take away everything we love if we don't act against it very strongly and very quickly. So I think it was kind of cool if we could just like not ruin stuff for once. And I think it's a big ask for video games to fix the world. We can't do that. But what is really cool about them is that they are exceptionally good at inspiring and motivating people. I like to quote a study where they found that people who play video games are much more likely than other people to have lucid dreams, which is dreams that you can influence and control. And I think that if video games can change how people dream, it's not unlikely to think that video games can also change how people act and make choices. And in any case, I think we're not going to make anything worse by trying to inspire people. So that's what I will be trying to do. And it's better than wasting time. So thank you.
Thank you, Martin and Celine, and thank you for also showing us that a lot of decision makers want to influence artists and creative people and put messages in their mouth. And maybe we should just trust. We should trust artists and our creative industries that they will say important, relevant things about the times we're living in, the society we're living in. And we should focus on the preconditions. The first plenary session of today will be a series of speakers, and the first one out is the responsible commissioner, Maria Gabriel.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I cannot be with you in Umeå today, but I couldn't miss this chance to send my full support to this conference on artistic freedom. I would like to thank the Swedish Presidency for bringing this community together today. I congratulate the 23 Swedish cities who are members of the ICOR network, the International Cities of Refuge, especially Umeå, hosting you today. Umeå, European Capital of Culture 2014, is also famous for its Sami culture. Allow me to say, your efforts to preserve cultural diversity is a great example of what can be achieved through freedom of artistic expression. Artistic freedom is fundamental to our way of life. So often, artists are the first to sound the alarm when something is going wrong in our society and in our communities. Preserving their ability to speak is to preserve our ability to respond to challenges, to course correct, to see things differently. These topics have been of crucial importance in Swedish cultural policy for decades. I'm glad that you will address them in this conference at a timely moment when war has broken out on the European continent. The European Union is fully committed to the protection of freedom and democracy in the European Union, to the fight against disinformation, to the protection of European values and promotion of citizenship, education and civic engagement. We have policy behind it, notably the European Democracy Action Plan, not to mention the European Work Plan for Culture 2023-2026. We have funding behind it. For example, Creative Europe program, funding several cooperation projects like the initiative Artists at Risk. And we have the power of community behind it. Just look around you. Indeed, we have two important communities represented with you today: the culture and creativity, knowledge and innovation community of the EIT, and the expert group on the status and working conditions of artists and cultural and creative professionals. Dear friends, I count on you and on your work in this conference. After all, if one artist isn't free, then no artist is free, because we all lose the freedom to listen to what those silenced have to say. Thank you for your commitment, and I wish you fruitful debates.
That was Maria Gabriel, Commissioner for Innovation, Research, Culture, Education and Youth. And our next speaker is Michaela Magas, designer and member of the President von der Leyen's high-level roundtable for the new European Bauhaus. The floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you to Commissioner Gabriel for this really important and heartfelt message, I believe, because speaking now as a creative practitioner, I can tell you that working with women in the leadership position at the European Union have been really a revelatory experience, because for the first time we've had policymakers who have placed the culture and creative sector at the very center of European policymaking, and culture as absolutely pivotal for the transformation. And this is a very bold move, because the European Constitution actually doesn't have provision for this. In the European Constitution, each member state is in charge of their own culture, and we do not have a pan-European remit. So to actually do that is a unique situation, is one we should treasure. And if we lose this relationship with high-level policy, we are really at risk of reducing culture once again to be just one tool in the regional policymakers' toolbox, as opposed to a grand force for the good for the entire continent. So it's something that I'm really, really keen to preserve. And I'm really grateful that we have this new style of leadership that has been promoted by the women in leadership positions in Europe. I have been feeding policy from grassroots creative experimentation for the past, over 10 years now. It didn't happen, it wasn't certainly planning to do that. I am a designer by profession, I'm a creative professional. But I saw an opportunity when I was invited to contribute to Europe, and I have been doing it ever since. And this is with a community that now counts over 8,000 contributors globally, from New Zealand to Alaska, multidisciplinary community that's really facilitated by the culture creative methods. Multidisciplinary, transgenerational, and also, of course, multicultural. So these are just some of them, always driven by missions, always driven by the idea that we can attempt moonshots, and creating the kind of results that create evidence for policymakers that is not based on statistics, but on real human transformations and on tangible results on the ground. And I think this is really important. This is where our sector, it has been absolutely pivotal in demonstrating what can really be done. And so what we tend to do is, I want to start with a sort of a deep dive as to what we really do on the ground that informs us. So as a member of the high-level roundtable of this new European Bauhaus initiative, this is what us at the high-level roundtable have brought to the initiative. Experience of years and years of working with communities. So our last few labs have been in most wonderful area of biodiversity in Europe. We've run 21 labs across the world over the past 10 plus years. I will just show you one moment from that last lab. So we set ourselves a grand challenge. I mean, these are the ingredients. We say, what is our next frontier? And with the European Bauhaus, because now I have been part of the European Bauhaus the last 2 years, we've really shifted the paradigm from human-centric to ecosystemic approaches. And we set ourselves the challenge of addressing something called ecosystem living. This is a term that we came up with because we said, okay, urban planning addresses the urban complexity, and it addresses the systems that are within city boundaries. What we are interested in expanding on those boundaries to the territories beyond that are not often recognized in our value systems. If you look at Google Maps, you will find the density of information in cities, but there is density of information that should be also applied to the areas outside the periphery that is actually really feeding us as human beings. And we create a level playing field. This is us in the wetlands of Aveiro, of this wonderful, most biodiverse, one of the most biodiverse areas in Europe, in situ, really working from the ground up. And it's heavily curated. It's 50 people from all over the world that are brought in, together with the local communities and local experts. And these are the sort of things that we find, when we start to look at ecosystems, the sort of relationships that are happening on a small scale. Because very often, of course, when we are working towards a better future environment, as it is our mission, we really need to actually consider everything, all the small things that we can do from the small scale up. So in this case, this is just one of the small ecosystems that include technology, include the human intervention that we can observe. So out of the 18 projects that came out of this month, this week of intense activity, I will show you just a couple of examples so you get a sense of this intersection of different disciplines. And this is just one reaction by a scientist to some of the inputs from the creative practitioners.
It's something that Monica said. There is no such thing as waste in an ecosystem. I think that's profound.
So, no such thing as a waste in an ecosystem. So, a amazing young artist from Berlin, Max Bereitzer Smith, starts by digging deep into the ground and picking up a small ecosystem, a small lump. And he starts to analyze what makes this compound, what are the elements that make it, what holds it together. And he starts to talk to biologists. And he starts to map them out according to what he's learning. And this is through artistic approach and artistic method that is very rigorous in terms of analysis, in terms of learning, because our approach is to constantly learn and to actually then process this learning through an artistic, rigorous method and interpretation. And so what you're seeing here is muscles that are the tiny, tiny muscles. They're being divided up into the core components and all of the different natural elements that are part of it, but also all of the other debris and other elements. And then he comes up with what I thought was extraordinary, which was the 9 lessons from muscles in ecosystem living. Now I'll let you kind of process those. And what's really interesting is the way that this rigorous artistic process can actually inform us is that you start to contemplate those and you think, well, what does he mean by incorporate technologies? Well, there is such a thing as a bisum, which is a substance that holds the muscles together. And now this is something that he has newly learned to be this connective technology in this micro ecosystem. And then I looked into it further and I went, right, well, this is really interesting because it's actually in the Rosetta Stone. Ptolemy V mentions it as the substance that made this fine cloth. It's part of our textiles history. It was used by the Romans and the Greeks to make this thing that's known as sea silk. So it's actually a bio-based material that we have kind of left behind, and it may need another look. So suddenly we've had this slight revelation here. And then I'm thinking, well, actually, if I give this list to an urban planner or to an architect, they actually might get inspired by it. Or if I give it to a technologist, they might actually think differently about how they construct systems. So this is how the practice informs this also decision makers, because we filter some of these ideas that are acupuncture points in personal and project development that get then taken forward by others and built upon. And we've had enormous results as a result of this kind of practice, because we've had people who have here in Umeå, for example, been incubated with products that were then patented for primary industry. Or we've had huge success stories with sort of taking things forward with putting a few females in the leadership of creating technologies based on some of these findings, and then creating an environment where, for example, out of 800 plus prototyping participants, 53% are women. I mean, and this was also in Sweden, interestingly enough. And this is a woman artist who's absolutely amazing. She's very well known in Portugal, also doing PhD at Oxford, Marta de Menezes, and showing how you can use as an artist the scientific method for your art. Marta actually investigates the boundaries between us and other beings, including virology and screen grafting and contamination. So this is just to show the diversity of approaches and the cross-fertilization of approaches. I want you to hear for a second what it feels like to be part of this space. This is just for from the last lab.
And each day, and each hour, and each conversation I had was a new experience, was something new I could learn. And what was great is that we grew together as the week passed. We grew in confidence, we grew in the ability to discuss certain ideas. Some things paid off, some things didn't. But to have that open conversation in a comfortable environment was something that was very unique. And to have the time to think creatively and co-create with other people was something that was just really special.
For me, MTF Labs was an opportunity to feel reconnected to my field of interest and passion by learning from others. I love the fact that there were people from different backgrounds and age groups, which is not so easy to have in my work circles now.
So when I was asked to do this speech, our colleagues from the Cultural Ministry said to me, well, what do you think is unique about Europe? Which is this kind of quintessential question. And I was asked that question actually by the European Commission back in 2014. And I said, well, why don't you consider a trio of strengths, the key European strengths being industry, creativity, and social conscience. And it may sound terribly simple, but actually if you think about it, I would challenge you to think of another part of the world that has these three so heavily ingrained into the social fabric. And if we lose any one of those, I think we lose what it means to be European. So actually it's a bit more significant, I think, than just throwing three words around. And to me, this is very important, and we are actually at risk of losing this third one at the moment, and I think it's incredibly important that we keep it. It is part of what makes us unique in Europe, and the kind of values and the kind of cultural perception that the world has of us, which actually makes us far more competitive, if you want to use that word. And this kind of gives you the context of the new European Bauhaus that was launched in September 2020 by the President as a co-creation space that's led by the cultural creative practitioners, but it's actually a multidisciplinary environment where all these people work together. And it was the very, very first time that there was a direction in policy that did not come with a top-down mandate and a huge pot of cash to implement. It was actually for the first time a learning process that was facilitated by our sector, where our sector was absolutely pivotal. This is where I say this is something that we really need to preserve. And we started work together, very privileged to be part of the high-level roundtable, some absolutely amazing people, all of whom have been feeding from grassroots, from working with communities, from actual hands-on practice. And we were asked to create the concept for it. And the first thing we did between us was to map out our values, and we identified a strong line of justice. Fundamental principles first. And the second thing we said, what kind of outcomes do we want? And there was a very strong line of learning through doing. So it's a learning process, a constant learning process. If you have a multidisciplinary environment, there's not one person in that environment that knows more than anybody else. There are all these people who can join forces together, and actually the whole becomes more than the sum of its parts. So some of the things I'm hugely proud of on behalf of my dear colleagues on this high-level roundtable. This is Shigeru Ban working together with Hubert Tramer, Polish contributor to the high-level roundtable. Within 2 weeks of the breakout of the Ukrainian war, they were on the ground along the borders with the Ukraine, building temporary shelters according to Shigeru's practice that he has implemented in many crisis areas around the world. He flew in, he was there. We, as a high-level roundtable, have been actually very unique. They say to us, you know, you guys are advisors. You're supposed to just meet once per year and just nod. You know, what are you doing? and we are actually out there on the front line. Actually, that's not an easy task. I can tell you that from experience. And this has been a matter of huge pride, because we had 2 million people crossing over during the first 2 weeks from Ukraine to Poland. And the first crisis meeting that we had, we said, okay, we do not call this a refugee crisis, we call it an influx of talent, an influx of intelligence into Europe. And if you think about how that was perceived compared to the Syrian crisis in 2016, you will know the difference, because in the entire year, that year, 1 million people came into Europe, and they were treated, the whole thing was treated very, very differently. So it does matter. And then if I show you the beyond European perspective here, which is actually Sheila Patel, absolutely phenomenal influencer on our high-level roundtable, someone who keeps grounding us and saying, yes, but you're so European when you talk about these things, you actually are not considering other perspectives. And I can tell you that from our perspective, things look rather different. This is so important to have on your table when you're talking. And this is her project, Roof Over Our Heads. This is from literally, I think, last week. The labs of, this is kind of like, you know, in your ecosystem of mussels, grab whatever floats by, apply it. And these are informal settlements where she works, or they work as an organization, global organization, with women in women collectives in informal settlements, and teach women on how to create sustainable living in these environments. And she talks about informal as a very, very important word. Why? Because if you look around us and look at us here, you know, we are all very formal in the way that we behave, in the way that we are trained to act in society. And the problem is that that creates certain type of boundaries, even blinkers. And in this sense, we have millions of people living in informal settlements. So she asks us to actually relax a little bit the formality of our behavior and attitudes and considerations to actually embrace informal situations. And so more than human ecosystems is a paradigm that we have actually really pushed through the European Bauhaus, and it has influenced the way that industrial policy now works. And I can tell you that from all of the different horizon calls that are actually being inspired by ecosystemic thinking. And this is, you know, 50 people from around the world in this environment. But I'm actually, this is a picture from Portugal, but what I want to do is zoom into Sweden, because if I can think of a better match is between the European Bauhaus approach and the Swedish model. And this is some of the early workshops that were done by Sweden that were, you could say, European Bauhaus inspired, but actually no, it was restarted. The process of sustainable cities, assembling all these actors who can actually create a sustainable environment of Sweden, was a process that was initiated in Sweden a long time ago. And it was just restarted with this injection. And these were phenomenal workshops. I was part of some of them, and some wonderful stuff came out of it, but it actually influenced how the European Bauhaus was shaped. And then we have these seminal projects that are like Duvet in Jämtland that actually looked at reinventing all of the processes, reshaping all of the processes with the communities on the ground, and by also curation and bringing talent in and experts into the mix. So again, Shigeru Ban on the ground, he's designed the greenhouse for Duvet, but also very, very like amazing programs for circular food, for sustainable architecture, and for these new methods of governance, which has actually become really, really successful and very influential. And I'll tell you how and why. I mean, the next stage of this process was part of Visions in the North, the very first European Bauhaus program that was funded by a member state, Sweden, for the Norrland region being that part. Well, actually, that's a little bit more than that part. But and the Duvet model was turned into the Norrlands model for the city of Umeå, rather starting from the neighborhood up. And so this was the Umeå model that is now evolving. It was evolving through various strategies by a multidisciplinary team. We had in the Visions in the North 6 municipalities working with all kinds of governmental institutions, including ArcDes, who's with us today, and with architects, and with designers, and with people from other professions like sustainability experts, and with governance experts as well. And so this is, for instance, a strategy for waste, management of waste. But then we had Helene Hellmark Knudsen, who's with us actually in the audience today, creating what I thought was a groundbreaking twist in how we deal with governance. And that is, she asked, what is the role of a civil servant in these new strategies? And the role of the civil servant becomes, according to Helene, but I completely agree with her, I've seen it, becomes an enabler, a facilitator, and someone who actually is able to co-curate this space and also mediate between what's happening on the ground, between the communities and high level, rather than the implementer of a high level directive and someone who polices the implementation. Completely different agency for the governance, and that's why we are now taking this to a European level. So what we've decided to do is we've got some people from the Norrlands model now working with us to actually take this to a European regional innovation model. And we have the Committee of the Regions, the Council of Europe, and the European Bauhaus, who then want to distribute, who are absolutely on board with this, and they want to distribute this new model across the European regions. And we've done the same with the new NEB Academy, the European Bauhaus Academy, which was announced by President von der Leyen during the Nordic Bauhaus conference that was held in Helsinki with all the presidents of the Nordic regions. And this is the Norrlands model team proposing the next step for that, building on the original Walter Gropius vision for the Bauhaus. We are now taking this to CERN in Switzerland. We are gathering all of the leaders of the European Bauhaus projects and communities to then work together to take the next steps in what we do with education, how we innovate also with digital technology. So the next steps of implementation of the European Bauhaus happening next week, and I'm actually curating that, so I have been up to here and sort of not sleeping, I don't know if it shows. So quickly, just to run, because I know that we have stuck for time, but to run through some of the basic principles that have underpinned this process, and that have really emerged out of our co-creation process in the European Bauhaus, and that is the focus on where we converge. This is a picture also from our labs, where scientists and artists work together with technologies that have been used to measure the rate of glacial melting through sound, but a first experiment in underwater overtone singing. So hugely experimental space. But the reason why we are able to do this is because our first question is, what is of common interest to us? Where do we converge? Rather than dividing ourselves into categories. So this is radical inclusion. Cross-domain, but never cancelling each other out. This is Shubha Santrandrayat. I always have trouble pronouncing the name, but she is a well-known oceanographer who's created completely new ways to visualize the exploitation of the oceans. And this is her beaming into our labs. And of course, her knowledge is hugely important to be captured, not by kind of meddling it and kind of mashing it up into a big pot, but actually each person in their own right contributing with their knowledge to a common pool. And then combining indigenous and digital technology. This was a strategy of actually during the week of labs, we went from the raw material, the fish, to creating leathers, to actually then creating masks and costumes, and then combining it with biosensors by guys who flew in from California and from Toronto. And then the same material then being followed through the complete life cycle, which is actually some of this has been really now on the agenda with industry, and something that is absolutely essential if we are going to have sustainability, to have systems that can follow that. And then, of course, the beyond European perspective. I think I've illustrated that earlier, but this is us working with satellites. And this year we had 8 global satellites. This is us talking to Chicago, beaming into the regional ecosystem with their knowledge, with their expertise. And then to each region according to its needs. And this has been a big move, a mantle I took on, because I said, well, we were discussing at high-level roundtable, everybody agreed that the center has moved. What used to be known as the periphery is now our focal point. This is where the frontier to climate change is. This is where the frontier of the transformation is. And therefore, the regions of Europe are now our focal point, and we need to move to that. So what I did was a proposal that I developed together with the Committee of the Regions, which actually for the very first time concatenates European instruments from the region to the center. So it was during the crisis meetings about Ukraine that I managed to assemble Committee of the Regions, Interreg Europe, the whole of the Interreg Europe, DG Regio, and the cohesion funds. And we gathered together and said, okay, how do we now concatenate our instruments so that we have an injection of a recovery spark with a regional lab in every region of Europe, and then the resulting results are picked up by cohesion funds, by Interreg, totally on board with this idea, and then scaled up so they can actually plug into bigger instruments. And then we actually inform from our regional challenges, from the intelligence that we can find all across European regions, the main Central European direct policy. And this was adopted last year as part of the Committee of the Regions statement. There are several instruments that are being looked at in terms of implementation, but the main message is, it was also in Parliament, 100 labs for 100 regions, which we want to roll out across Europe. And if every one of these labs yields even a fraction of what I have witnessed in our work, then we will end up with massive societal transformation as a result. So that's from me for now, and I'm sorry that if we've run a little bit over time, but I hope it was informative and useful for all present. Thank you.
Thank you, Michaela. I think we all share that it was very informative. I am here to ensure that you do get coffee before the breakout sessions. It's right now not really certain because we are so much over time. But I think that the next two speakers are, the kind of speakers you would give the full time to get their message through. So we will try to keep the schedule. You'll then have 10 minutes for coffee until the breakout session starts. I will make sure that you all get your caffeine. And here with us from the city of Hamburg is Inga Wellman. And she is the head of the Arts and Creative Industries unit at the Hamburg's Ministry of Culture and Media. The floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for these very inspirational talks. we never met before, but in fact there was a lot of sort of common sense in that, and I think I might repeat some of the ideas that you've already brought out, but I'm now coming from a more sort of local, regional level, and I would love to present some examples to you. Maybe something about myself. I'm trained as a media artist and cultural manager, and looked at creative industries, governance models from sort of an artistic perspective, from an outside perspective, as an analyst, as an advisor to governments. And then at some point, like 13 years ago, I was asked by the city of Hamburg to come into public administration and set up the unit for creative industries there. So it was a real change, a shift in, you know, perspectives, and then bringing the knowledge, the theory into practice, and looking up. There's a bit of, yeah. This is better. So it's a bit of, I've made some experiences in bringing theory into practice, and this is a very rewarding experience, in fact, because from the outside perspective, you can just tell everybody what to do, but as soon as you step into a system and you meet the people who live in that structure, and you realize that their mindset might not be the mindset that you need in order to, to have some change, it's a real challenge to sort of bring this change along. But let me start with the presentation. I will just quickly talk about governance models for creative industries over the past 20 years. So it's better. I'm going to make it very short because we don't have much time. I brought four examples from Hamburg and beyond in order to illustrate how creative industries are having an effect on how we perceive the world and how we change policies and the general situation of what we're facing as global challenges so far, and I'll conclude after that. So, very quickly, I started like 20 years ago looking at creative industries governance models, and there was it started off with a very top-down strategy, people talking about creativity, creative class, creative city. Everybody was just, very interested in this concept of creativity without actually being able to define it in a proper way, or in a way that would be suitable for all countries. And there were reports being written, there were people, staff being installed in public administration in order to care for this. And we were really looking at how to support creative culture and creative industries in order to grow, to flourish, and to become more visible. Cool Britannia, for example, this campaign by the UK, really promoting creative industries at the time. Then we like about 10 years ago, we slowly moved into a different stage. We didn't ask ourselves anymore, how can we support creative industries, but more asking how can creative industries and people from this area can support other industries, other branches, other sectors. So a lot of cross-innovation formats have been set up in cities and countries, and it had a more sort of economic motivation. And it's still running. It still needs to go on because there's so much work to do still, and like over the past maybe 5 years or so, the notion of the culture and creative industries ecosystem has appeared, because the world. I mean, we all see that the world is upside down. We're facing huge global challenges with climate change and migration issues, and we have just so many challenges ahead of us that we are now thinking about, okay, what are desirable futures and how can we join forces together with the tools and skills of the cultural and creative industries in order to meet these challenges. So that's where we're at now, and that actually reflects your presentation, because you brought some brilliant examples on how to actually implement it. I want to bring my first example. In Hamburg, in 2010, we installed a structure like a service agency in order to promote creative industries, the different sub-markets, and we only just focus on, how to provide space for them, how to provide knowledge in order to make them entrepreneurial strong, how to actually finance the whole sector. And then we thought about what I earlier said. We thought about, okay, what's the innovation thing in all this? And we set up the Cross Innovation Hub in 2016, funded by European money. And it is a learning project. It's a platform to explore and open up new innovation potentials, really bringing together creative individuals and people from other areas, people that would have never met, and they would probably also didn't know that there would be so much sort of inspirational stuff coming out of this encounter. So we reacted as a curator of new encounters that weren't possible before. We looked at different forms of innovation, so product innovation, process, services, changes of work culture, digital transformation, business model, etc. And we looked at the big challenges: health, climate change, resilient cities, smart cities, logistics, the industry transformation, mobility, etc. Setting up different formats for this, how to actually bring people together over months or just within one day. You can look it up. You can look it all up on the website, because I'm not going to go into detail on this. But it's been a very, very cool journey so far, and we're still continuing it now in the new period of funding. This is an illustration of the process we usually set up. So we have different phases. It's all being accompanied by professional moderators and people who are trained to bring people together, to bring out ideas and then condense them back into something that is that can be transformed into a prototype and then put into action and roll out into the market as well. I have a different image for that as well, a bit less technical, but there's one big mistake in that image. There are no people to see, and actually, you saw that in the talk of Michaela. It's all about people. We heard that yesterday at the talk, at the dinner speech of, I think Andrew was his name. He said it's people, people, people. And we can see that here in the room as well. It's so important that we meet, that we interact. It's all about resonance between people. It's about what Martin said earlier on about his game. It's about empathy, about really, understanding how the other person ticks, what drives that person, and how we can actually relate and create something, co-create something new, which is useful and purposeful. This is a second example of how to install some urban transformation in a city like Hamburg, but you can also adapt that to any kind of city around the world. We set up a fund. It was actually a reaction towards the COVID crisis. There was a lot of space free in the inner city. All the retail spaces just empty. It was a very horrible situation, not very nice to be there anymore. And so we created a fund of like 9 million euros in order to finance creative people using this free space, talking to private owners, actually persuading them to give away the space for no rent. So the creators only pay €1 or €1.50 per square meter, which is nothing for inner city areas. And we really try to accompany that with promotion and marketing methods and help them along to use the space. And actually, the city of Hamburg has really transformed into some kind of culture and creative hub in places where you wouldn't expect it, where you normally have luxury stores or just the big, the names, and all of a sudden you have little pop-up stores and artists' galleries, etc. And there's, for example, this huge department store next to the central station in Hamburg. It's a former department store called Karstadt. empty, 8,000 square meters, and we've been using this for like the last year and the whole of this year with this fund, and it's just crazy what's happening there because we have a constant transformation going on. Many different actors just using the space, doing their stuff, bringing in new people, interacting, etc. So that's a wonderful example, and of course many more collaborations. Another example, this is not a Hamburg example. It's actually, you know this program, it's Key Change. It's an initiative by the European Union. Of course, it's funded with money from the EU, and it's a program that brings underrepresented gender in the music industry on the main stage. So that's really the goal. We want to bring in more women. We want to bring in more non-binary people onto the stage. And I mean, we thought, yesterday we had these wonderful presentations and performances of Justina and Linnea. So we had 2 women here, so very represented. But normally it's not the case. We usually don't have that many women in the music industry. And this initiative was launched in 2015. It was the PRS Foundation in UK actually being the former lead partner, but due to the Brexit, they had to give it away, which is sad. So the Reeperbahn Festival in Hamburg took over the lead. It's the biggest club festival in Europe, promoting new talent in the music industry. And we've working very closely together with partners from Sweden and other countries, as you can see. This is the case about women in the music industry. So as you can see, we're not there yet. But I think about 600 partners have now signed the Key Change Pledge, which wants to install like a percentage of 50% in the music industry, 50% of women by 2022, which was last year. And they're managing, and there are 13 festivals really pioneering this movement and making sure that the program they show is 50-50. And it's also about broadcasting programs on the radio, etc. So it's something where you can really see, this is, you know, people from the cultural side, initiatives, etc., from the private sector, together with the help of public money and governments, to make a change about how we perceive women, men, the cultural sector as such, and as a whole. These are some of the partners. So you can see it's a very international, it's a global movement. And now coming to my last example. This is about creative content and alternative ways of media consumption on the internet. We face big challenges in terms of intellectual property, and we have set up a new initiative. Actually, it's been set up by private people from the media industry, together with, you know, on a sort of, you know, on an eye level sparring partners relationship, together with the city of Hamburg, and it's a model to renegotiate the way we consume media on the internet or creative content and such. So we want to install a decentralized system to provide content, moving away from the big platforms, moving away from the sort of dependence on platforms that are not from Europe. So we really want to strengthen the European side of content distribution. And we do this by separating these 4 building blocks listed here: the content owners, the registry, the broker, the user data. This is what the ecosystem looks like. I'm not going into detail. You can look it up on the internet. And if you can't find this, just write to me and I'll send it to you. But you can see it's complex, and I hope it's going to work. We need more people to join the movement. And these are the benefits. So we really want a new digital public space for opinion forming and information exchange. We want to strengthening pluralistic societies with a free, democratic, basic order and European cultural diversity. We want no concentration of power in a few companies. We want a better enforceability of legal requirements. We want revenues to remain in Europe. And we want to strengthen Europe in the areas of market, business models, technologies, and innovation. So, now, for my conclusion, as I said, I'm repeating things that Michela already mentioned. It's a complex situation, and we really need to foster this dynamic interplay between the different stakeholders, and I'm talking about stakeholders and not shareholders, on all levels, in all sectors. It's a process, an ongoing process. It's never sort of finished. We have to be very wide awake, very open, very alert, very empathic towards each other, and yeah, we have to ensure the fair working conditions and intellectual property distribution for this culture and creative industries. We have to strengthen those intermediary structures in order to ensure a very unbureaucratic, agile operationalization. That's not a good word to be speaking out, because of course, public administrations can't always ensure a very smooth and quick reaction towards things that are happening in the world. I mean, we're working at that, but we need these intermediaries who are fast, who are quick and agile. And we've got some very good experience in Hamburg with that. We also need to invest in research and evaluation of cultural and creative industries cross-innovation cases. We have Jenny Kornmacher sitting in the audience. She's been running the cross-innovation hub for some years, and she can tell you more about all the methods and all the wonderful cases, maybe if you want to talk to her later. And that's what you also mentioned. We have to redefine the role of policymakers and public administration as enabler and as curator of innovation. Really, bringing in new people with a different mindset into these structures and establish a new working culture within those public administration, in all these ministries, etc., etc. Developing a pan-European mission and impact-oriented mindset. And you could probably all, or some of you probably have read Mariana Mazzucato, as she's writing about the mission economy and about public purpose. She's a professor of economy in innovation and public value in London. And she talks a lot about this moonshot thinking, what you also mentioned before, thinking about high missions, bringing in together all the resources that we have in order to get there, not thinking about, okay, what's the budget and how can we actually spend it, but thinking about where do we want to go, where do we want to what's the mission, and how are we going to join forces and use the resources that we have in order to get there. So it's a very different mindset, and we can all install this also in ministries, etc. We have to do that in order to bring this forward, in order to have a desirable future. And some of these ideas can already be found in the Council conclusions on building European strategy for the CCI ecosystem from last year, during the French presidency. But a lot of these ideas are, in transformation. They are being put to ground by wonderful examples, and we have to just, get on with it. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Inga Wellman. And now the last speaker before the coffee break. It's the city of Umeå, represented by Fredrik Lindegren, Director of Culture, and he'll be joined on stage by Pavel Lindegren. And I can assure you, you will all wake up.
Thank you for that presentation. Hello, everybody. Good to see you all. Once again, welcome to the city of Umeå. I was given time to do a short presentation about this city, but you have already heard it multiple times, how great this place is. So I would like to address some other topics, and I would like to go to the content of what we're talking about. And it brings me back to a story when my late grandmother turned 80, and there was a party for her, and it was great. It was like 30, 40 people there. It was a small stage, some music, singing, and it was like, yeah, great. And my uncle, he was a salesman. He was selling cleaning products to hospitals. He had a couple of glasses of wine. Then he came to me and said, Fredrik, we're going to do a performance. And I said, what? Yes, we're going to do a performance for my mother and for your grandmother. I got a script. And I said, well, why not? So we went a bit outside, and he showed me the script. It was a small paper, and he showed, here it is. And I looked at it, and it said, who is it? That's it. So is this the script? No, turn it around. And it said, what is it? So this is the thing? Yeah. So all of a sudden, he walked out, and he said, there will be a performance. Please gather in here. So I was like, no, we're going. So we go out on stage, it's empty, my grandmother sits in front like this, really high expectations, and he turns to a new person, and he looked to me and he says, what is it? And I didn't know what to say, so I said, who is it? And he walks around, and this starts to continue, and I think for 2 minutes I felt, this is going nowhere. But after a while, going around with these two lines, and he was in the curtains coming out, who is it? And I was like, what is it? So this starts to be something of a performance. And all of a sudden we leave and we go out, and he was like, that was amazing. He was so fulfilled. And I felt, makes no sense. And then my grandmother comes in and he said, I loved it. I loved it. And I said, why? Because I did not expect that to happen. Celebrating my 80th year. And then I get this idea, of course, it's about doing the unexpected. That is why we are here. I mean, we talk about artistic innovation and culture, but what it's all about is to do the unexpected, because once it's done, it will be expected. So that is the trick. And we try to create spaces for that in the municipality, in the city, in the region, in the European Union. And we also have to go back to ourselves. I think in every day, try to do things that kind of switches things, do a new thing, small changes. And it brings me back to when we were bidding for European Capital of Culture. We were thinking, when we met the jury, we have to be unexpected, because they know what we will say about all the buzzwords. You know them, we talk about culture, innovation, and sustainability, and so on. So we said, well, we do small things that is unexpected, just to open up. So we got 30 minutes to meet that panel to give the final presentation. 30 minutes. And then it was 1 hour questioning. And we said, what is the most unexpected thing at a conference? That is not to use your time. So we did it in 15 minutes. And the chairman said, are you already finished? Yeah, I mean, we give you 15 more minutes of questions. And he said, that was unexpected. So I guess that you have to do small things to create eye-openers. Unfortunately, when I look at, I got 3 sons, and I've seen them go to school, and they have, of course, very different persons, but I've seen that when you go to the different kind of programs, which is like the practical ones, the cooking, drawing, carpentry, sewing, all this is somewhere where you can be creative and you can go for something else. I've seen that more and more of these areas become theories. So I asked my son, he was very good to doing hamburgers. He was like 12 years old. And I said, do you do any cooking now when you have these lessons? No, so we don't cook. We make reports how the meat is transported and the carbon oxide for that, and how it could transport food sustainable in a sustainable way. So in the end, when the practical areas becomes theories, we will create a bad atmosphere for young people to create and to be growing up in a creative environment. So therefore, the school has to take more risks, and my son was like almost saying, I don't go to school anymore because it's only theory, and what I do and what I love is not that. So I asked him, and he said, well, there was one thing which was good for me in school, and that was my teacher, my music teacher. And he gave me this item. It says Umeå kommun on it. It's actually a digital key. It was to the music room. So he said to him, when you feel like the theory doesn't work for you, when it's rough, take this key, lock up the door, go in and play, and stay in school. So almost every day he came in late because he was in this room playing. So I felt that to make some conclusions about my presentation here is to actually invite him on stage to do his own interpretation of the content of the conference, the idea of living in Umeå, the idea of this history of this city, and to do that in his own way. It's about artistic freedom. So before I leave the floor, I would like to warn you, there will be some strobes and some sound, which is much higher than this. And, well, let's take a risk. Welcome on stage, Pavel Lindegren. The floor is yours.
Now it's time for some Swedish fika.
Thank you, Pavel Lindegren. It's now time for a coffee break, and after it there will be breakout sessions. So just please listen to which room you're going to in the next breakout session. And I hope you have registered for 2 breakout sessions. All of them are the same, so you will be listening to 2 of them, and they will follow each other. So the first round of breakout sessions will start at 10:40, and I please ask everyone that's doing the breakout sessions to keep the 45 minutes, because then we will have a 5-minute break between the breakout sessions, and then the next round of breakout sessions will start. And the next round of breakout sessions will then start at 11:40. So 10:40 and then 11:40. The first breakout session, What Creates Creative Nations, will be in room number 1. Room number 1. The second breakout session, The Real European Champions, Why the Next Stars Are Not in Tech, with Per over there, will be in room 2. The third breakout session, Design and Living Environments, will be in room 4. And the EIT, Culture and Creativity, an Ecosystem for European Transformation, breakout session will be in room 6. So please go to the first round of breakout sessions and then the second round, starting at 10:40 and 11:40. Now enjoy your coffee.